Does anyone else wonder about this story? I always feel really inadequate when I hear it. Why did these guys, these regular working class stiffs, Peter and Andrew and James and John, drop everything to immediately, Mark says, immediately follow someone they've never seen before? I know I would have been like, well, golly, thanks, Rabbi, but I've got a job, and I have a family to support, and I have people who depend on me, and I just can't hit the road with you quite yet, but do you have an evening workshop that might be available once a week, maybe, on Zoom? I could fit that in. What caused these guys, and they were guys, to totally drop their lives and follow Jesus? One explanation that we've read and heard was from a teaching video that came out about a decade ago, a little more, by Rob Bell. And he shared the ideas of Lois Tverberg about how rabbis and sages chose disciples back from the years about 200 BCE to about 200 CE or AD. And it helped me understand a little bit why the call of Jesus might have been so compelling enough to leave everything immediately.
So Rob Bell talks about how, about the age of 6, many kids, boys certainly, and if you were in a fairly progressive synagogue, girls as well, you would go to a level of education known as Bet Sefer, literally the house of the book. And there you would memorize Torah. Memorize all of it. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the whole thing. You had to memorize it for 2 reasons. One was that knowing the Bible is an essential part of being Jewish, and also no one had their own copy of the Bible then. Torah scrolls were expensive, and so you memorized it. And then, after doing that for 4 years, around the age of 10, the best of those students would go on to the next level, which was called Bet Talmud, the house of learning, where they would then memorize the rest of the Hebrew scriptures, the history, the Psalms, the Proverbs, the prophets. And if you weren't the best, well, then you went back home and learned the family trade. If you were a girl, that was when you went back home and learned the keeping of the house. Whether it was fishing or making sandals or stonework or whatever, that would be your future.
At around the age of 14, at the end of that level, almost everyone would go back to their family to learn the trade. But the best of the best would go to the rabbi and say, "Rabbi, I want to become one of your followers." And if the answer was yes, the rabbi would say the words that the student yearned to hear: "Come, follow me." And they would enter Beit Midrash, the house of study. And they would commit to following their rabbi so closely that they would not just learn from their rabbi, like you learn from a teacher or a professor, but they would learn how to be just like their rabbi, to learn to think like their rabbi and live like their rabbi and behave just like their rabbi. In the collection of rabbinic thought called the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef ben Yoezer, some 200 years before Jesus, at the very beginning of the rabbinic movement, is recorded as saying, Let thy house be a meeting house for the wise, and powder thyself in the dust of their feet, and drink their words with thirstiness. Disciples, by sitting at the feet of where their rabbis taught and following closely behind them as they traveled the dusty roads of Judea so that they could hear what their rabbi was saying, they would be literally covered in the dust of their rabbi, which was the goal of the best, of the best, of the best.
So much so that there was a saying, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Right? So if Jesus is walking near the Sea of Galilee and sees Peter and Simon and James and John fishing, what does he immediately know about them?
That's a real question.
As far as their learning is concerned.
They
Exactly.
are not the best
They
of the
are
best
not
of the
the
best.
best of the best of the best.
They may not even been the best from the first level.
Right. They're following the family business. No matter what they might have hoped for their lives, this is what their lives is. But Jesus was a different kind of rabbi. He didn't wait for the right students to prove that they could come to him. He went looking. And he went looking for those and surrounding himself with people who weren't the best of the best of the best. He said to ordinary people, ordinary fishermen, come and follow me. I think you can be like me. Not because you are the best of the best of the best, but because God is the best of the best. So in today's reading, Jesus chooses fishermen. In other places in the gospel, he chooses other people, and he ends up with disciples that are from all walks of life. Fishermen and a tax collector and an anti-Roman activist, a zealot. And
The Romans would have considered that terrorists,
a terrorist.
not activists. But, yeah.
Right. And beyond those 12 guys, Jesus was surrounded by a number of women who were also diverse. One was a woman of means. Another was a woman who had been healed of 7 demons. Some were homemakers. Some were dreamers. All of them following this rabbi.
And none of these followers was the best of the best of the best. Following Jesus was kind of like a traveling island of misfit toys.
Yeah, that's right. Church is kind of an
At its
island of
best.
misfit toys.
And this rabbi was saying to each of them the words they didn't get to hear
Right.
when they were younger. Come, follow me. And they were about to get covered in the dust of this strange new rabbi. A dust of healing, a dust of love, a dust of challenge and grace, of crucifixion and burial and resurrection. And they were changed, and the world was changed forever.
So that teaching from Rob Bell helps me understand a little bit of how people just got up to follow Jesus. And we also want to focus on another detail in today's reading, which is where Jesus says to Peter and Andrew and James and John, the fishermen, he says, come with me and I will make you fish for people. Fish for folks, sometimes I've heard it said. And often those words, when we hear those words, we literally get caught on the catching part of the fishing for people. That Jesus is calling us to go out and catch more believers and bring them in. There's an additional transformational part of that fishing for people that we want to tease out this morning.
So when Barb and I first moved to Vermont back in 1980,
It was the end of the 80s, at least.
late 80s, and we would be driving by and see a stream on the side of the road. My first thought back then was, ooh, I wonder if there's a swimming hole. But the next year, when one of Barb's parishioners taught us how to fly fish, over the years that has transformed the way I see a river. When I look at a river now, I automatically look at it like I imagine a trout looks like it. I don't look at the river, I look under the surface, and I'm looking for the shelter of rocks and submerged logs. I'm looking for protection of shade trees and overhanging ledges. I look at the algae, or lack thereof, that talks about the fertility of the water and how many caddis and mayfly larvae that river can support. I look at the currents where the seams collect food. When I look at a river now, I'm looking at the needs of a trout for cold, oxygenated water, for food, and for protection from current and predators.
One of the ways I know this is that as we drive by a river, Mitch will mutter to himself, "That looks fishy."
And then when I finally do fish, which is rarer than I used to, if I choose the correct fly and overcome my somewhat clumsy cast, once in a while, I get the incredible feeling of the pulse of life on the other end. And when I get that feeling on the end of my taut line, there's nothing like it. And then there's the gentler joy of giving a brown trout a little kiss and returning that glistening, jeweled critter back into the river so that someone else can enjoy it another day. And all that happens, when it does happen, when I learn to see like a trout. With that in mind, I imagine Jesus' invitation to come with me and fish for folk doesn't mean go out and convert people.
But that's not the only thing it means.
Or not the only thing. But it means learn how I see. Learn how I love. And you, with your worldview and your hard-won skills, pay attention to people. Go where they are. Share the good news of my love in all the ways they can hear. If you're a fisherman, then use the way you understand fish to understand people. Get to know how they think, how they feel, what their needs are, how they act. If you're a tax collector, apply your love of details to learning the details of people's lives. If you burn with a passion for justice, find others whose passion burns bright and meet them there with a message of love and mercy and grace. If you run a busy household, take that talent for planning and noticing and use it to meet the needs, the physical and the spiritual needs of the people around you. Jesus called all kinds of people, just as they were, to use the skills they already had to follow and join his way, his way of radical love, not because they were the best of the best of the best, but because God is the best of the best of the best.
So what does all of this mean for us here today? Worshiping in the city of Cambridge, which is a best of the best of the best town, if ever there was one. And
I've seen a lot of nods out there.
Yeah. It's like in the air. One of the things I'm learning, having been in Cambridge now for a couple of years, is that it is an intense meritocracy in this place. And it's full of a remarkable number of talented and driven people. And it's also full of a lot of people, myself included, much of the time, who suffer from imposter syndrome. People who don't rise to the level of what's needed to live in this place. I can't tell you how many people come to me as the pastor of this church and say, I've just moved into town. Can you help me find an affordable place to live in this town? And I say, no. Right? And it's heartbreaking to say that. We all wonder if we measure up to the standards here. And I can't speak to where you are vis-a-vis the standards of Cambridge or whatever they are in your life. And I can assure you of this absolute truth about Jesus. When he calls you, he calls you. Not for what you have, not for what you'll accomplish. He calls you for who you are deep in the center of yourself, even if part of you is fighting imposter syndrome. Even if you feel like a failure, he calls you because he believes you can be like him. Not because you're a candidate to be, I don't know, the next president of Harvard, although I got to say, I wouldn't want to be the next president of Harvard, so.
Don't worry, we won't.
Yeah, that's right.
We won't be on anybody's short list.
True.
Jesus calls you because Jesus needs you for the creation of God's beloved community.
That's right.
The kingdom of God. Jesus needs you in all your specificity. Whether those gifts are valued by the academy and the marketplace doesn't matter to Jesus.
That's right.
What matters is that they are valued by the Rabbi who calls you. Each of us, each of you has gifts to offer the world, even if they are not valued by the marketplace. Each of us has a particular perspective from which we view the world. Also evolving, of course, as we grow in love and grace, yet still distinctive to each one of us. That distinctive quality that you bring is exactly what Jesus is calling when he asks you to fish for people. It's not about catching. It's about learning to see and live and love like Jesus.
And the closer we draw to Jesus, the closer we draw to each other who are also seeking to follow him. And the more we start to live and look and love like Jesus, well, the more we're covered in the dust of our Rabbi. And so hear his words to you this morning. Follow me. Amen.